What if the most disciplined man in the room was also the one hiding the most pain? That was the question on everyone's mind the moment he stepped onto the stage. The studio lights gleamed against the bright scarlet of his uniform. The iconic bearskin hat added to his towering presence. Impeccably still, composed, unreadable, like a statue carved from history itself. But behind that uniform was something no one expected. Before we go on, take a second, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what respect means to you. And if you've ever wondered what it really takes to wear the red uniform, hit that subscribe button now. Because this story is different. When Steve Harvey introduced him as a real half-royal guard from Buckingham Palace, the audience chuckled, expecting a few good laughs about stiff poses and silly tourist photos. But within minutes, the air would shift. And by the end of the interview, not a single person in that studio, including Steve himself, would be the same. Because today, we're not just meeting a soldier, we're uncovering the soul behind the salute. Steve Harvey leaned forward in his chair, intrigued but still carrying his usual charm. So tell me, Henry, what's the hardest part about standing still for hours in front of Buckingham Palace? Is it the tourists, the weather, the itchy hat? A gentle smile touched the edge of the royal guard's lips. It's not the weight on your head that gets you, Henry replied, his voice low, deliberate. It's the weight you carry in your heart. That was the moment when everything shifted. The audience, once buzzing with curiosity, now fell into stillness. Even Steve, a master of reading people, leaned back slowly, sensing something deeper was about to surface. People think the uniform is what defines us, Henry continued, but most never ask what we carry behind it. This isn't just a story about a guard, it's a story about what we choose to hold and what we're forced to let go. Henry reached into the inner lining of his ceremonial tunic and pulled out something unexpected, a small lavender ribbon, faded, frayed at the edges, childlike in its softness. This belonged to my sister, he said, Amelia. She tied it to her hair every day when she volunteered at the Veteran Rehab Center. Even when the war never touched her directly, she wanted to help those it wounded. The hush in the room turned heavy. Steve's voice dropped to a respectful murmur. She sounds remarkable. She was 17, Henry said. Too young to carry that kind of weight. But she did. And then, one day, he paused, his jaw tightened, but his gaze stayed steady. A patient with untreated PTSD lashed out during a group session. She was trying to calm him down. He had a flashback, thought he was back in combat. She didn't stand a chance. And in that single moment, everything I trained for meant nothing. Steve sat in stunned silence, his eyes blinking back disbelief. Henry continued, They offered me bereavement leave, but I made a request instead. I asked to be assigned as guard for her funeral, to stand in full regalia, stone still, beside her casket. No tears, no flinching. The audience held its breath. An elderly woman in the front row dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Standing there, Henry said, I realized I wasn't guarding Buckingham Palace. I was guarding her memory. That was the day I truly understood what service meant. Steve broke the silence, his voice slightly hoarse. Did anyone know that you were her younger brother? Only the commanding officer. Everyone else thought I was just another ceremonial guard. Henry gave a quiet sigh. But beneath the uniform, I was a grieving brother doing the only thing he could still do right. The camera zoomed in slowly, catching the shimmer in Henry's eyes. He looked directly at the audience. You see the buttons, the medals, the stance. But what you don't see is the memory of a girl who died trying to bring peace to others. That's what I wear every day. If you look past the uniform, you'll see a story written in silence. Steve stood quietly, gently resting his hand over his heart. Brother, I had no idea we were headed here, but I'm glad we are. Henry simply nodded. Sometimes we wear the silence louder than any words. Steve Harvey paused. The weight of the moment had settled thick in the air, but something about Henry's stillness suggested the story wasn't over. You mentioned earlier that your sister used to volunteer at the rehab center, Steve said. But what kept her going? What made a teenager walk into a place full of broken men? Henry looked down, then reached into his tunic once more. This time, he pulled out a carefully folded letter. Worn, creased, clearly opened many times. She wrote this, Henry began, on the morning of the incident, but it never made it to the post. He unfolded it slowly, the room so quiet the audience could hear the paper crackle. Sometimes the most powerful goodbyes are the ones we never hear. Henry's voice was calm, but something in it trembled. Not weakness, but reverence. She always wrote to me once a week. This one was different. He cleared his throat gently before reading aloud. Dear Henry, there are days here when it feels like time has stopped. The walls are always the same color, the stories repeat, and some of the veterans, they forget where they are. But even in all of that sadness, I've found something beautiful. Henry paused. A few audience members wiped their eyes. You know what they love most? Laughter. I play your old voice messages for them sometimes. The ones where you pretend to be the Queen's butler or leave goofy accents. They laugh so hard, some even cry. Steve smiled gently through misty eyes. She sounds like she had the soul of a healer. Wherever laughter becomes medicine, we begin to understand real service. Henry nodded, continuing the letter. They ask about you often. One man, a Marine named Wallace, said he stood outside the palace for 3 hours in the rain just to see you. He said it gave him hope, knowing someone still stood watch. Henry folded the letter halfway, pausing. She wanted to surprise me. She was planning a trip to London, said she had enough saved for a flight. He let the words hang, unfinished, but everyone knew the rest. Plans don't always get canceled. Sometimes they're just carried forward by the ones who remain. Steve asked softly, Do you ever hear her when you're on duty? Henry didn't hesitate. Every day, especially when the courtyard is silent, I feel her in the stillness, not like a ghost, but like memory anchored in stone. Stillness can be a sanctuary and a battlefield. Steve slowly stood from his chair, emotion rising. She didn't make it to London, he said, but today, she's standing on this stage through you. Henry looked up, eyes glassy. And through those watching, who now know her name. He gently refolded the letter and placed it back into his tunic. I never got to write her back, but every salute I perform now is my reply. The camera slowly panned the studio, people dabbing tears, hands over hearts. A silence more powerful than any standing ovation. Steve sat still for a moment, hands folded. He had guided thousands of interviews, but this one was different. It wasn't about performance anymore. It was about presence. Henry, he said quietly, what changed in you after her passing? Henry leaned forward slightly, posture still military perfect, but the walls beginning to soften. Before Amelia died, he began, I thought duty was about obedience, about standing still, following orders, wearing the uniform like armor. He looked out into the audience, voice slowing. But grief strips you of armor, and what's left is truth. Sometimes we don't find meaning in uniformity, but in the cracks that let humanity in. Henry shared how, after the funeral, he returned to duty, but something inside him had shifted. I began to see faces instead of crowds, children instead of tourists. I'd watch the way parents held their kids, and wonder if my parents held Amelia the same way when she was that small. He paused, swallowed. I realized I wasn't just guarding a palace. I was guarding history. Memories. People's beliefs in something sacred. Where you guard something long enough, it begins to guard you back. Henry spoke about a cold morning weeks later when a little girl in a wheelchair was wheeled near his post. Her face lit up when she saw him. She saluted, awkwardly but earnestly. Her father whispered, "She wanted to see someone brave today." "She didn't know my name," Henry said, "but she believed in what I stood for." And in that moment, he didn't feel like a soldier. He felt like a symbol, a bridge between pain and pride. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't shouted, they're simply stood for. Steve leaned in, clearly moved. "Do you think Amelia would be proud of the man you've become?" "I hope so," Henry said softly. "She used to say, 'You hide behind that hat, but I see your heart.'" He smiled. "I think she'd be glad I finally let others see it too." True strength isn't in hiding pain, it's in standing with it, unshaken. The audience exhaled in unison, as if all had been holding their breath. A gentleman in the third row removed his veteran's cap and simply placed it on his lap, eyes moist. Steve's voice broke slightly. "Henry, what do you want people to remember when they see that red uniform now?" Henry looked into the camera. "Don't just see the uniform. See the human inside it. See the sister he loved, the laugh she gave, the silence he now honors." And then, with quiet resolve, "I don't stand still because I must. I stand still because some stories are too sacred to walk away from." Behind every uniform is a vow, a loss, and a love that never fades. A few weeks after the interview, Steve Harvey's production team received a handwritten letter in meticulous cursive, sealed with the Royal Guard insignia. It was from Henry. "I wanted to thank you, Mr. Harvey," it read. "Your show reminded me that silence isn't the only form of service. Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is speak. What if the greatest strength isn't in standing still, but in stepping forward to speak truth?" Henry's appearance on the show had quietly gone viral, but not because of his uniform. It was his vulnerability, his story of Amelia, that ignited something deeper. Veterans groups began reaching out. Schools requested him for assemblies. Parents wrote letters saying his words helped them talk to their children about grief, discipline, and resilience. But what truly surprised Henry was the letter he received from an 8-year-old girl named Madison. "She drew a picture of me," he told Steve, returning for a follow-up episode. "Stick figure in red, and she wrote, 'Dear Mr. Guard, I want to be brave like you when I grow up.'" Henry choked up briefly. "I used to think bravery meant being silent. Now I know. It can also mean showing your scars. Where you tell your story, you give others permission to heal." He began doing talks under a new program called Behind the Uniform, initiated by a foundation for grieving military families. The message? That the people who wear silence as armor are often those who've fought the hardest inside. Henry stood in gymnasiums, in church halls, in quiet veterans' homes, no longer in full regalia, but always with Amelia's ribbon tucked into his jacket pocket. "I talk about her laugh," he shared, "how it filled up a room, how she believed kindness could diffuse even the worst storms, and how I now carry that belief like a second skin. The uniform may cover the heart, but it can't hide the echo of those we carry inside." One day, during a school visit in Indiana, a young boy asked, "Do you still cry sometimes?" Henry didn't hesitate. "Yes, especially when I think of how proud she'd be, not because I stood still, but because I started moving again." Steve, hearing this, asked, "Do you feel like your mission changed?" Henry nodded, "Completely. I still serve the crown, still stand at my post, but now I also serve her memory, and every person who's ever worn grief like a second shadow. Service doesn't end when the parade does, it evolves with the wounds we learn to carry." The audience sat quietly, absorbing the transformation. Henry concluded, "I used to believe I stood guard to protect tradition, but now I understand. I also stand so others know they're not alone." As the camera zoomed out, his voice echoed in the studio, calm, steady, and filled with quiet conviction. Because behind every uniform, there's a story that deserves to be heard. Months passed. The media buzz faded. The lights dimmed. But Henry's journey inward had just begun. Each morning, he stood at his post at Buckingham Palace. Same uniform, same discipline. But now, something had shifted. Behind those unmoving eyes was a man fully awake to what his stillness meant. True discipline is not just obedience. It's understanding why you're standing there in the first place. Henry had started keeping a small journal, not of military records, but of moments. One entry read, "A woman in a green coat cried quietly today while watching me. She held a medal in her hand. I nodded to her without moving. She understood." Another, "A boy saluted me with a trembling hand. I saw fear in his eyes. Cancer, perhaps. I saluted back when the crowd turned away." Those moments never made the news, but they made something else, meaning. Some lives don't echo loudly, they echo deeply, in small, silent waves. Henry also began visiting the Veterans Rehab Center where Amelia once volunteered. At first he entered quietly, no uniform, just a man with folded hands and tired eyes. One of the older patients asked, "Were you one of the redcoats outside the palace?" "Yes, sir," he answered. "You ever lose someone?" Henry simply nodded. The man whispered, "Me too." Healing often begins not with answers, but with someone saying, "Me too." In one group session, a young vet opened up for the first time in months after Henry shared about Amelia. "I didn't think people like you cried," the man said. "Thought you were made of stone." Henry smiled gently. "We're not made of stone, we just carry it." His story, once a private ache, had become a source of comfort. The ribbon in his pocket wasn't just Amelia's anymore. It represented anyone who ever gave something or someone to a cause bigger than themselves. The strongest soldiers aren't the ones who never break. They are the ones who choose to keep serving with their cracks showing. One day, a commander from the Royal Guard pulled Henry aside after watch duty. "You've become something unusual," he said. "A guard who talks?" Henry chuckled. The commander shook his head. "A guard who listens." It was then Henry realized all along people hadn't been watching the uniform, they'd been watching the man inside it, the way he stood, the way he honored the unseen, the way he quietly offered permission for others to grieve. Growth isn't always loud, sometimes it's just standing in pain without walking away from it. The morning sun painted golden light across the stones of Buckingham Palace. Henry stood tall, the crimson of his uniform vibrant against the backdrop of history. Yet today, his silence meant something more. He wasn't just a royal guard performing a duty, he was a man carrying a memory. It's not the uniform that defines the man, it's the soul that dares to stand behind it. In the crowd, a father whispered to his son, "That's the man who was on Steve Harvey's show, the one who lost his sister." The boy peered up, eyes wide. "Is she here now?" Henry didn't move. But in his heart, he answered, "She's never left." That day, as the formal ceremony ended and the guards began to rotate, Henry made a subtle but deliberate gesture. Just before stepping away, he nodded, not to a dignitary or superior, but to the people, to the veterans watching, to the woman clutching an old medal, to the boy with trembling hands, to every unseen soul who'd ever stood quietly with grief. The loudest acts of love are often done in perfect stillness. Weeks later, Henry stood again, not outside a palace, but in the basement of a community center in rural Ohio. The audience was smaller, a dozen older veterans, their spouses, and a few local school kids. He told them about Amelia, about the ribbon he carries in his jacket pocket, about the day his silence broke. And afterward, an elderly woman approached him. "My husband never spoke about the war," she said softly, But tonight, I think I finally heard him, through you." Henry took her hand. "Sometimes, we speak for those who couldn't. Healing doesn't require a stage. Sometimes, it only needs a heart that's ready to listen." That moment became a pattern. Henry began traveling between towns, not with guards or ceremony, but with stories, always carrying the same message, that behind every uniform is someone who once needed to cry, needed to laugh, needed to remember. He didn't need to raise his voice to move hearts. "I still stand post," he'd tell each crowd, "still wear the uniform, but now I also stand for Amelia, for everyone we've lost, for those who think they have to hide their pain. Service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. Sometimes that's when it truly begins." One afternoon, after a speech at a high school, a student asked him, "Mr. Wilson, do you still cry?" Henry answered without hesitation, "Yes, but I don't hide it anymore, because every tear reminds me I'm still human and still standing." That honesty rippled across the room. The teacher later said it was the first time students stayed quiet for the entire final bell. Bravery isn't the absence of tears, it's learning to stand tall in spite of them. Life lesson, behind the uniform. So what do we learn from Henry's journey? That duty and grief can walk hand in hand, that behind every perfectly polished shoe and unblinking eye, there might be a broken heart, learning to serve with strength anyway. That real courage is not about pretending you're unbreakable. It's about choosing to keep going after you've been broken. And for all of us, especially those in our later years, it's a gentle reminder. You're still here for a reason. Maybe you're not wearing a uniform. Maybe your battlefield was raising children, surviving loss, or simply holding your family together. But you still carry stories, still carry love, still carry purpose. If you're still breathing, you're still needed. We want to hear from you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how deeply did this story touch your heart? Drop your number in the comments. Let's see how many people this story resonates with. If this story moved you, like this video to honor the ones we carry in silence. Comment below what part of the story touched you most. Subscribe for more real, powerful stories from behind the uniforms. Hit the bell icon so you never miss the moments that remind us what really matters. Henry once thought his job was to stand still. Now he knows his job is to stand for something. And as you go about your day, remember this. Behind every uniform is a heart still beating, a memory still burning, and a reason still worth standing for.